Hey, and welcome to the show. I'm your host, Una Duncan, and this week we are airing part 2 of my discussion with Dr. Andrea Love. So just to remind you, Andrea is the founder of Immunologic. She combats scientific misinformation through education and public outreach. Last week, we talked about all the medical misinformation online and how you can empower yourself against it. And today, we're getting political. We are going to talk about how science is ignored on both sides of the political spectrum. We're going to talk about MAHA. We're going to talk about Robert Kennedy. And then I am going to do a lightning round to get your questions answered about mask wearing, the carnivore diet, the metabolic reset diet. I hadn't even heard of that one. Seed oils, and all the stuff that you are hearing about online right now. Enjoy part 2 of my chat with Dr. Andrea Love.
Breaking news. Your dream life isn't going to happen because you made a vision board. You're going to need goals, grit, and some woo-woo shit. This podcast is about getting clarity on what you want, having the grit to do the actual work, and most importantly, constantly training your brain to be your bitch. Ready to be inspired? Here is your host, best-selling author, Una Duncan.
Andrea, I wanted to quote an article that you wrote recently where you said, the wellness industry and the clean and green movements really started with liberal-leaning individuals concerned with the environment. Now, the wellness industry has veered firmly into the arms of medical conspiracists, which tends to be conservative-leaning people with lower education and strongly anti-mainstream, anti-government. So why do you think the wellness movement has shifted so radically?
Yeah, it's fascinating. And of course, I'm not a political science expert, but I'm a little bit of a governor. I, am equally intrigued and frustrated by government and also the lack of understanding our society has and how our government functions. But so I try to kind of understand why things get entrenched in society. And a lot of it is a result of politics, right? Because they make our laws and regulations and budgets and all that. But if you look at kind of this evolution of the medical freedom, there's been kind of two arms of it, right? So the anti-vaccine medical freedom movement was started almost in a bipartisan way. Now, there was a conservative arm of it with the John Birch Society back in the 1970s. And that was really kind of geared towards this idea of the, free market, right? It's always been, well, small government, we don't want to control things. So we want this free market so people can choose whatever they want. But on the liberal side, it really accelerated with these fear of toxins, the fear of chemicals, because these individuals tend to be very concerned with their health and often with the health of their environment, which are good things to believe in. But the problem is that they've been led astray by anti-science activist groups like Greenpeace and the Environmental Working Group, and now even Consumer Reports, where they pretend to be advocating for science for environmental and personal health, but they have major financial motivations to push misinformation because their donors and the organizations that financially support them have profit motives to scare people about other kind of alternatives. And so when you saw kind of the OG anti-vaccine movement was born out of, well, I don't want these harmful ingredients injected into my child, right? That's the rhetoric that you often hear from more liberal people. Whereas the opposition to vaccines coming from your more conservative people is really, I don't want the government telling me what to do. I don't trust the government. And if they're telling me what to do, I automatically don't trust that information because there's got to be an ulterior motive. They're trying to control me. And the wellness industry has actually leveraged that intentionally. And so if you look at when dietary supplements were unregulated, this was in 1994. And Congress, this was bipartisan, but it was mostly spearheaded by Orrin Hatch in particular. And he was lobbied really heavily by supplement companies. They gave a lot of money to these congressmen to basically convince them to remove the regulatory oversight that the FDA previously had on dietary supplements and essentially take it away and be like, well, supplements, they don't need to be regulated. And the reason for that, the argument that Congress made was, we want people to have choices about what they do with their health. But the actual reason they did it was because the more regulatory oversight, the more actual science and data you need to have a product approved to be put on the shelves. And by taking that away, now all these supplement companies can pretty much throw anything on the shelves without any safety data, without any efficacy data, and without even demonstrating that they're being manufactured in a way that has quality control. And so it allowed that market to explode, exponential growth with this market. It's over 19% annual growth year over year. And it's insane. And what it means is now all of these supplement companies can make these really kind of vague health claims and sell all these products and kind of exploit people's valid desire to want to be healthy. And at the same time, they also have created a network of people with authority, whether that's politicians or these non-governmental organizations or medical providers or people with MDs, but they don't actually practice medicine, but people that have the appearance of being credible. And they push these narratives of, well, I don't trust the medical infrastructure, and that's why I do this instead. And so it actually does create this either or phenomenon, this both sides situation. And so it has been done to undermine robust science and medicine, because you're not going to convince someone to go buy all these products that have no data behind them unless you convince them that they can't trust the actual data. And so it's an intentional and deliberate process that's been really in the works for probably 50 years or so to get people to stop trusting scientific experts, medical providers, government agencies, safety agencies, because that's the only way that you can then get your customer base, right? And so if you actually look, because there have been studies that have looked at the more harmful medical conspiracies, opposition to genetically engineered crops, which are extensively studied and tested, or, belief in cancer pseudoscience, or, belief that vaccines are filled with toxins or microchips, or that fluoride in water is used to poison us. Those medical conspiracies, they are believed most by people that participate in the most wellness behaviors. And wellness behaviors are everything from buying and taking dietary supplements to avoiding GMO foods, to buying organic, to all of these other kind of, health interventions that are sold by this kind of, alternative industry. And not only do the number of wellness behaviors increase with the number of medical conspiracies they believe, you also see a decline in participation with evidence-based measures. So going to the dentist, wearing sunscreen, getting your annual well visits, getting your flu vaccines. And so it actually is this kind of diametrically opposed industry that presents itself as some altruistic alternative to this evil infrastructure. And the wellness industry and these alternative practitioners that have kind of taken up this mantle, they actually coined that phrase allopathic medicine. And it was done deliberately to position proven medicine, conventional medicine, as this kind of equal and opposite to naturopathic and so on. And so this was actually coined essentially as a marketing term to almost be like a dog whistle for people that are already skeptical or distrusting of, legitimate expertise. And, it was exacerbated during COVID, of course, because of how politicized information was and how much social media played a role in that. And that has led the really rapid acceleration of kind of that influencer space that continues to kind of push that button, don't trust government, don't trust, food companies. And of course, it's very selective, right? Don't trust big food, but you can trust big organic food, right? Don't trust farmers, but trust the organic farmers, And so it's always very deliberate because they want to undermine things that have evidence so that they can convince people to kind of move over to the things they're selling that don't have evidence.
So this shift of the alternative medicine movement from sort of liberal hippie style to more conservative, it was really just a marketing tactic. They were just like, oh, what are conservative people saying already? Government bad. Don't tell me what to do. And now let's fit our narrative into that. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's why you actually see some convergence, right? Because people think of like political ideology as a straight line, but it's really more like a circle or a horseshoe, right? So you have extreme beliefs on kind of both ends where you have very liberal leaning individuals who do have some of that conspiratorial mindset. They do have distrust of government. They do have distrust of authority. And then on the same side, you have conservative leaning or, it's kind of this like extreme libertarianism. And that's where kind of that wellness industry converges because it really kind of picks those things that resonate with those different groups. And that's why you see, chemophobia and this like, we got to ban the food dyes by like MAHA, but also by like Cory Booker and Gavin Newsom, because, Gavin Newsom, his bans were sponsored by the Environmental Working Group, which is a notorious anti-science group. And, it's kind of going at these like pieces of like, well, you want your kids to be healthy and these things are not healthy, even though they're actually not illegal in all these other countries. But, it kind of evokes that emotional reaction. And because politicians are not scientists, they're like, well, I'm going to trust this organization because they're telling me this and they're citing this study that's, again, in animals or, cherry picked.
You just gave a talk about how echo chambers and political associations supersede evidence. For example, Democrats are much more likely to listen to scientific consensus to get vaccinated, and Republicans are much more likely to listen to scientific consensus that, for example, GMO foods and foods with pesticides are safe. So when I read this, I felt like people already believe what they believe, and I don't know if any evidence is ever going to penetrate those party lines. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the TLDR is that people have strongly held beliefs, and those beliefs are informed by not just political ideology, but their upbringing, the things that have shaped their outlook on life, how they perceive the world to function or our society to function, their communities, who they spend time with. And so these personal beliefs, they really, really, really color your receptiveness to factual information. And that's why you see, people who even are like, I believe in science, and they've got their lawn sign with the science is real and love is love and this and that. And they're the ones who are saying, well, I only eat organic because I don't want pesticides, when organic is not pesticide free. They use actually quite a few pesticides and they're not regulated for safety, but they have been entrenched in that talking point for decades that you could repeat that, well, that's actually not right. And conventional produce has, they're all below safety thresholds and they're regulated and they're surveilled and they're monitored. And GMO foods actually use fewer pesticides for many reasons. And if we want to reduce pesticides, we should all be, supportive of that. But like, once you have this strongly held belief, it's really hard to like disconnect that emotional attachment to that when you're confronted with facts. And then you add on the fact that people are not good at admitting when they're wrong, right? They're not. So if they're confronted with this information and they've believed this other misinformation for 20 years
and acted on it and told people about it.
Yes,
yeah.
Exactly. Then it's like, oh my God, I can't concede that that's true, because that means I should be embarrassed. I should be mocked. I should be ridiculed. And so I think, there's a huge emotional, psychological component to that. But I think we also need to have a society in which it's okay to be like, I made a mistake. Like I made an error. I misinterpreted it. But like, we don't have that, we're not generous to people about that. And so I think, that's a whole other conversation. But yeah, I mean, the thing that gets people to be receptive to hearing the new information is creating a trusting relationship. And so that's, I think, the ultimate goal of anybody that's trying to counteract a lot of these things, is that you have to find either a trusted messenger that person is going to be willing to listen to, or you have to be the one to create that trusting relationship. Because if you don't have that, it doesn't matter how much data you throw at them. They're not going to listen to you until they have a vested reason to listen to you. And the vested reason is not, I care about your health because I'm telling you, like, I'm doing this because you don't need to waste money on this, expensive food. That won't supersede I'm listening to this person because I have this relationship with them.
Let's talk about MAHA and its relationship to this movement. Can you briefly explain what MAHA is? Because I have a lot of non-American listeners, and how it fits into this whole shift.
Yeah, so MAHA is the new motto of Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s kind of anti-science movement, and it stands for Make America Healthy Again. And so for those who are not familiar, Donald Trump's motto was Make America Great Again, or MAGA, insinuating that once upon a time we were great and then we were bad, and he's going to make us great again. And so RFK Jr. has essentially just co-opted that to healthy. And of course, it really, really exploits a lot of the frustrations and challenges about American health and American health care, talking about cost of health care in the US, cost of administering health care, challenges with various lifestyle diseases like obesity and so on. And so, it has these kind of little nuggets of reality, but then of course he uses that to suggest that the reason that our life expectancy is lower than kind of similar demographic countries in Europe is because of the toxins in food, or the pesticides used on products, or the vaccines, or something like that, and not those countries have universal health care. They have walking friendly cities. They have very different lifestyles that are more conducive to being more active and focusing on preventive health, because even people in the US with health insurance, we usually have copays or deductibles. And so you're spending a lot of money before you could even get healthcare. And so people put it off because it's money, right? And so because of that, now there's a shift in focusing on preventive health to address things before they become a problem, to kind of acute management of issues as they arise, right? And so there's that. There's a neglect of the social determinants of health, wealth inequality, the fact that 50% of Americans don't have adequate health insurance, so they're not even seeking care. Food deserts, which was created because of a political decision that got worse. But yes, no, it's the food dyes, right? It's the fact that 90% of Americans don't eat enough fiber, and they've been scared about more affordable produce because RFK Jr. has scared them about pesticides. But yeah, so basically it's this kind of performative outrage, and it's all directed at big company X, right? Big food, big pharma, big this, big that. And the goal, of course, is to undermine all of these safety agencies and scientific tools that actually have improved our health substantially, right? We're not dying of acute diseases because we have vaccines and antibiotics and antiseptics and pasteurized food products and food safety. And so when you look at kind of, what people die of, it's things that are chronic diseases of aging, because we've shifted the cause of disease. That's not a bad thing. It's also what's increased our life expectancy. But, by kind of having these like little talking points, our food's poison, this is poison, and people are having this very emotional reaction to it, they're not bothering to fact check, right? Donald Trump the other day said that Europe doesn't use pesticides when Europe actually uses more pesticides per acre of farmable land than the US does on the whole. Substantially. Some countries in Europe use more than double the pesticides per acre of land than the US does. But, these misinformation claims are allowed to kind of run rampant. And so what's happened is essentially kind of propagating this distrust in these organizations or entities under the guise of advocating for health, when it really is just his Children's Health Defense rebranded with this new motto to appeal to a broader base, right? So now it's the fluoride is bad. MAHA, right? I care about the health of everyone who's drinking water. That's the same exact thing that he's been saying for 30 years with children's or 20 years with Children's Health Defense, right? These are not new points from him, but because it's now rebranded, and remember, he's a lawyer, his skill set is making persuasive arguments to public, right? And so that's what he's doing. And so he's undermining all of the scientific data on these topics. And, this will actually make health worse, right? It'll make health worse because he's promoting unproven wellness products that can cause active harm. We've seen an increase in acute liver injury and kidney injury because of people taking unregulated supplements. He's promoting unpasteurized milk. We've pasteurized milk for over 100 years in the US because it prevents deadly illnesses. He's undermining vaccines. And of course, he's trying to publicly soften his language. And so we've seen all this sane washing by the media who are like, well, he said that he's not anti-vax. He said that he wants the research done. But this is the same exact thing that he's done for 30 years because he picked up the anti-vaccine mantle in 1999. I mean, he's always done this. He talks a smooth game to kind of convince people that that's not what he's trying to do, when all you have to do is look at the evidence from the last 30 years of his activities to know that he has made a multi-million-dollar career out of scaring people about chemicals and health interventions that don't have risks associated with them. And he's profiting off of that. And now it's being platformed as, federal government policy. It's really, really concerning.
I had some questions from my audience and I want to ask you, but before we get to that, could I do a little bit of a lightning round and you could tell me what the evidence says about some hot button topics in a sentence or two?
Okay.
What about probiotics?
Probiotics are considered a dietary supplement, and basically they are live bacteria in the form of a supplement. So that means they don't have data to prove that they're effective. And the body of evidence right now suggests that they're actually not doing much at all, and they can be harmful in certain populations.
That's probiotic supplements, but probiotics in yogurt, generally a good thing?
Yeah, I mean, the whole thing is that in order for them to do their job, they have to get to the right compartment of your body. And most of these bacteria are probably going to get killed by your stomach acid before they get there. So yogurt is a great part of a healthy diet. There isn't a ton of data to suggest that it's the bacteria in the yogurt per se. But if you want to eat something that you feel has probiotic properties, definitely in food form is better than in a supplement form, because at least we know that those things are safe to consume.
Okay, allergy and sensitivity tests.
So any at-home tests are not reliable. Food sensitivity is not a medical condition, and food sensitivity tests basically look for an antibody called IgG that actually tells that you tolerate that food. So when you eat food, it goes into this immune compartment called the gut-associated lymphoid tissue, the GALT. And in there, your immune cells sample all these little food molecules, and they produce IgG to say, hey, I recognize this thing. We don't need to have a reaction to it, meaning it's all good. So these IgG levels that you're going to find on these food sensitivity tests are actually an indicator of tolerance, meaning your body has seen it, you've eaten it, it's all good. And so it's very misleading because people get these, tests and they're flagging all these foods And the levels of IgG are related to how recently you ate that thing or how often you eat that thing. It has no indication that you are having an adverse reaction to it. So it causes a lot of food anxiety and restrictive eating that has no science to support it. The allergy tests, so food allergies or any allergies are a very different immune response. And there's a lot of at-home tests now, urine tests, finger prick tests, and things like that. Those don't have data to support them. If you suspect you have a legitimate allergy, you need to go to a clinical allergist, immunologist for actual testing. And that would include also a full medical history as well as validated methods to test for allergic reaction, not the things that are being sold to you at home. The big rule of thumb is that if you're buying a diagnostic or a health test that is not approved by the FDA, you cannot trust that it is accurate in any capacity. And so nearly all of these at-home health tests fall into that umbrella.
What about ultra-processed food?
Ultra-processed food is in the news. So ultra-processed food is a term that has no standard definition, and everything we eat is processed to some degree. Processing is not automatically related to like depletion of nutrients or nutrient quality, right? There are a lot of highly processed foods that are actually really nutritious, and they're processed so that they can, serve people who are in food deserts or feed the military who are overseas or people who are victims of natural disasters. Meals ready to eat would be classified in the pop culture nomenclature as ultra processed foods, and they're incredibly nutritious, right? But we've kind of created this very clickbait, phenomenon where the conversations about ultra processed foods focus on foods like chips or cookies or whatever, right? And they say that they are inherently harmful, right? And they leave out the actual chunk of the conversation, which it's not about the singular food. The singular food is not harmful. It's about your overall lifestyle habits and your overall dietary composition. So the concern with ultra processed foods is not they are causing a health issue. It's if you're primarily eating those as your calorie intake and you're not eating fiber and things with, other sorts of micronutrients that we know are good for optimal health, then you might not be supporting your body as well as you should. But you don't need to be scared of ultra processed foods. And anytime someone tries to fact check this, no, we are not saying your entire diet should be ice cream. Right? The hyperbole is not right. Productive.
Yeah.
And a lot of the studies that are cited by media outlets, like trying to draw links to ultra processed foods and health outcomes, these are observational, subjective, like self-reported studies. So they're not controlled, right? So when they say, oh, well, people that ate French fries had higher rates of depression, well, they didn't actually assess whether these were even related to each other or if they were related in the way that they're claiming, right? Are people eating French fries because they're self-soothing because they are depressed? Or is the depression causing people to eat French fries? Well, that study didn't show any of that. And unfortunately, that important context is really left out. And it leads people to have food fear and anxiety and disordered eating, which is counterproductive to this discussion.
Okay, last one in the lightning round, seed oils.
Seed oils are fine. They're not toxic. They're not causing inflammation. They're not causing cancer. They should be part of a well-balanced diet. They are polyunsaturated fatty acids. They are what we would call good fats. I don't like using good and bad, but they're fats that have protective benefits when we talk about cardiovascular health and things like that. They don't contribute to risk factors for things like atherosclerosis and cardiovascular disease. Those tend to be your trans fats and your saturated fats, and those are animal fats. There's a lot of misinformation because people misunderstand the different types of fatty acids, and influencers mischaracterize omega-6 and omega-3 fatty acids. And they also misrepresent really, really badly done studies to kind of suggest that these are causing inflammation. There's no evidence to that. In fact, human evidence suggests that consuming a diet that has seed oils in it. Of course, your whole diet should not be seed oils. We're not going to be hyperbolic. That can actually improve health outcomes. It can improve life expectancy. It can actually reduce all-cause mortality. And again, it's talking about your overall dietary contributions of fats and the proportion of them that are unsaturated fats versus saturated fats. We all need fat to survive. And these seed oils, the fats that are in these, they make up the membranes of our cells. Like, this is essential for life. So we need to stop like demonizing things outright without kind of the appropriate context.
Totally. I'd love to ask you my listeners questions if you have 10, 15 minutes left.
Sure. Yeah.
First question from a listener. She wanted you to speak to mask wearing. Specifically, what is a balanced take on when to wear a mask, and is it necessary if you're not an at-risk individual and you are vaccinated?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think, again, this really comes down to kind of your personal risk assessment and, the activities you engage in. Now, in a perfect world, masks do protect, the spread of various microorganisms, not just, SARS-CoV-2. It's, they block particles and respiratory particles that can contain things. But at the same time, like, we do need to be realistic that it is often, not pragmatic to wear a mask every single, minute that you're in public. And so the way I typically approach it is, if I've been in a situation where I may have been exposed to an infection and possibly may be putting someone else at risk, then I would kind of take a measure to protect. Or if I'm actively, if I have symptoms of something, that would be a situation where it would be appropriate to mask. But that's more for protection of other people as opposed to my individual self, because again, I am up to date on vaccines for everything and then some. And also I personally am low risk for health outcomes. So, if I had a loved one or a family member or a friend and they were high risk, then I would be more diligent in those situations, both, before, if I knew I was going to see them for an event, before leading up to the event, kind of during that incubation period, as well as during that event. So that's kind of the balance take. I know that there's a lot of people that have kind of thrown it by the wayside and, there's some cultural stuff there. But another thing you can also include is, rapid tests. They're not going to catch every case of COVID, but they will catch, if you are contagious when you're most contagious, and they are still effective at picking up, the current variants that are circulating.
Okay. Next question is, why are some people achieving insanely amazing results, reversing diabetes, reducing triglycerides, lowering blood pressure, and getting to normal weight by turning carnivore? Is the Mediterranean diet not for everyone?
That's an interesting question. I think, again, this is something that a dietitian is really going to be the best expert on. But I think that a lot of times the claims that you see online are frequently exaggerated. And with something like the carnivore diet or even the keto diet, which kind of, have these really high protein, high fat, low carbohydrate, approaches, you often see this very precipitous initial decline in weight or different types of outputs or markers, but it's typically not sustained. It tends to bounce back very quickly. And so if someone is saying that, oh, well, they had this drop in, insulin resistance or blood glucose or things like that, and they're an N of 1, right? They're a sample size of 1. That's an anecdote, right? But usually either they might not be telling you the whole truth, or they're looking at something that happened very early on. Because if you look at the more long-term data, carnivore diet has a lot of risks associated with it, particularly when it comes to managing blood sugar, managing blood lipids, and overall kind of gastrointestinal health. Because when you have a diet that's really low in fiber, fiber is important not just for, keeping you regular, but it actually helps manage and liberate blood lipids. And so if you're not taking in enough fiber, that actually can lead to poor management, poor regulation on that sort of diet. And because of how much fat and protein you're taking in relative to other things, there's nutrient deficiency concerns. There's also concerns with straining some of your organ system. So really high fat diets, particularly animal fats, are at higher risk for acute pancreatitis, other sorts of things like kidney damage when you can't filter out as much protein as you're taking in. And so, you have to look at the whole picture. But no, the current data suggests that kind of the Mediterranean diet as it's used in the medical literature, which is really any diet that's high in produce, fruits, vegetables, fiber, lean proteins, and unsaturated fats, is the best diet profile for the vast majority of people. Now, that doesn't mean that there might be exceptions to the rule, but you never want to take an anecdote as evidence overall.
Yeah. We had another diet question. Someone wanted to know what you think of the metabolic reset diet.
Yeah, you can't reset your metabolism like that. It sounds very appealing, and I know metabolism is all the rage because Casey Means has picked that up in the MAHA movement, and she wrote a book claiming that she's a metabolic health expert, even though she has no medical or scientific specialty in that. She graduated from medical school and then dropped out of a head and neck surgery residency, which has nothing to do with nutrition and metabolism. But now she sells glucose monitors and an app and a diet plan. But yeah, no, you can't reset your metabolism with a diet. Metabolism is very complex and is regulated on both individual cell and organism level. And so a lot of things you can do to support metabolism are the non-sexy fundamentals, right? Eating a well-balanced diet, getting exercise, getting good sleep, trying to alleviate stress. But there's never going to be a quick fix diet or supplement that's going to reset your metabolism. These things really take time and take kind of concerted effort in order to make overall lifestyle changes that will, say you're struggling with, you feel like you gain weight too quickly, right? Maybe we need to increase muscle mass. And so like the ways to do that is not by like taking a fad diet. It's looking at strength training and exercise and things like that that are going to allow you to, have improvements in your overall metabolism.
Awesome. Last question from a listener wondering, what can individuals do to combat misinformation, for example, at family gatherings?
Oh, gosh. Yeah, no, holidays are coming. It's going to be controversial times. So first thing you can do is don't reshare misinformation, right? If you want to send it to somebody, screenshot it, because if you reshare it, it actually feeds the social media algorithms to feature it more. And we know that false information spreads more quickly than factual information because of that emotional reaction to it. So screenshot it. We want to talk about it. We want to debunk it. Also share credible information, right? Everyone can be a voice in this discourse, right? Even if you're not the one creating the fact checking, if you're sharing it, then it increases the chance that someone in your network might see it and they might reshare it and then someone else might see it. And so it's this, you kind of think of it like the spread of a virus, but in a good way. So you have these different, networks that it's spreading around. When it comes to family gatherings, this is something that you have to weigh, right? If there's someone in your family that is spreading really harmful misinformation, and you think it's worth maybe disrupting the peace at a gathering to kind of talk to them, then do it, right? I'm always encouraging of people who are willing to put themselves out there, but that depends on who the person is, right? I don't know your family member, so I can't speak to whether or not that's going to snowball into a really bad situation for you, or if it's worth your sanity during a holiday. But everyone can play a role in helping to combat misinformation. And so if you feel like that's something you want to do and someone in your family is going to come to the table with something and you're ready to kind of combat it, absolutely go for it. And, there's lots of science communicators who are willing to give tips on how to approach it if you have questions. So, try to seek out some guidance if you're not sure how to approach it. But if it's going to cause you more harm in that moment to deal with it, and you'd rather save it for a less stressful environment, because holidays are not, stress-free to begin with, that's okay too. It's a tricky situation because there's a lot of emotions held up in these falsehoods.
Mm-hmm. So who are you? This is what I wanted to end with. Who are your favorite science communicators? Who do you trust?
So, this is a great question. I don't have a single source that I would look to for everything. And that, I think, speaks to the theme that I'm talking about, right? No one is going to be able to be your source for everything. But, if we're talking about like women's health, Jen Gunter's fantastic. She's one of the only kind of women's providers that I've seen that, will not accept sponsorships by supplement companies. And she always does a really good job of providing, a discussion on the data. And she really has good understanding of that. If you're looking for things like how scared should we be about our skincare products, there's some really good cosmetic chemists and toxicologists. So Michelle Wong, her handles Lab Muffin Beauty Science, and Jen Novakovic, her handles the Eco Well. They do a lot about the misinformation in cosmetics, skincare products, formulations, chemicals that have often been demonized. And Jen in particular, she does a lot on the greenwashing and the false environmental claims about companies, and talks a lot about how, on paper, it sounds like this replacement sounds really eco-friendly, but actually it's more ecologically damaging. So they're fabulous as well. Obviously I'll recommend myself. And then also there's several good dietitians out there that do a lot of the kind of nuanced context about, what's real with diet and what's not. So for example, Danielle Shine, her handle's Danielle Shine Dietitian. She's Australian based, but she is a practicing dietitian, and she's actually also working on a PhD in nutrition and misinformation in social media. And so she's another great resource that I would recommend.
Amazing. Thank you. I'm going to gather all those and put them in the show notes. And Andrea, you have been so generous with your time, which leads me, I just want everyone to know, guys, Andrea is not only an immunologist, microbiologist, founder of Immunologic. She is also the executive director of the American Lyme Disease Foundation and a columnist, but she's also an ultramarathoner. She has a black belt in judo. She has 7 rescue cats. Some of them you might have heard on the show today.
Yeah,
and she's an amateur wildlife photographer. Dude, you have the kind of biography that makes me wonder what the fuck I'm doing with my life.
Oh my
and I'm
gosh.
just going to process that later. But I just want to say how grateful I am that you came on the show and educated us about all of that.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. And you can find me at dr.andrealove, and my website is immunologic.org.
Amazing. So great. Thank you so much, Andrea.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, my friend, how are you doing? Did you find yourself triggered at all by any of the stuff that Dr. Andrea Love said? I found that I was just like a little triggered when she mentioned Greenpeace and the Environmental Working Group because those were always trusted names for me. I never questioned that. And I was also a little bit surprised to hear that organic food isn't necessarily healthier for you. I'd kind of heard that, but I didn't know that for sure. And, I'm a little bit embarrassed because in parts of my program, I am sure that there is still language in there in our shopping list, for example, that encourage people to buy organic. So I guess I have to go and do my own research, which, to be honest, I was kind of hoping to avoid that after this conversation with Andrea. Like, I was kind of hoping that I would get her on. And by the way, dude, do you know how hard it is to grab an hour of time from someone like Dr. Andrea Love? Anyway, I thought that I would get her on and she would say something like, just shut up and listen to the, World Health Organization or whatever. And then we'd have our trusted source of truth. And that's that. But instead, of course, it's so much more nuanced than that. We have to find multiple credible sources that are in agreement and look for people who can explain things simply versus trying to blind us with science. And of course, be skeptical when the science comes with a costly solution and, oh, this person just happens to have the thing to sell you to fix it. Right now, I'm feeling that kind of deflated feeling when you're really hoping for a simplistic solution, you don't get one. And also a little bit of discomfort and suspecting that I might have been wrong about some stuff, and publicly in my case. So yeah, as my therapist says, AFGO, another fucking growth opportunity. So as part of that growth, I'm going to be following the people that Andrea suggested. I'm going to include them in the show notes. And as always, I'm looking for your thoughts. So send me a DM or leave me a review and let me know what your big takeaway was from this conversation. Until next week.
Hey dude, thanks for listening. If you like this episode, make sure you're subscribed so you can get the next one. And by the way, if you rate and review this podcast, it really helps me get found by other people who need some goals, grit, and some woo-woo shit. And be sure to connect and DM me at Una Duncan on Instagram and let me know what you thought of the episode. Chat soon.